Welcome to the Break Free Real Estate Podcast. Hey everyone, today David and I are going to share with you guys the number one investing strategy that will change your life forever. And it's called house hacking. So we've mentioned it on the podcast before, and a lot of people already know what house hacking is, but it is kind of a newer term. And so we thought that we'd kind of share with you guys today about how that can change your life. David, do you want to start it off?
Yeah, I think this is very applicable, especially to our younger listeners. I mean, if you're definitely under 25 years old, maybe even under 30 with a smaller family with some flexibility, like this really applies to you. Many of you know I have hosted another podcast for many years where I interview real estate investors that, have acquired multi-million dollar portfolios and in many cases billion-dollar portfolios of real estate. And I've over the years of interviewing, hundreds of these investors, there was one thing that I found that was pretty common theme among these investors and how they got started. And that was that their first property that they ever bought wasn't just a home for them to live in, but it was a rental property. They looked at it as an investment rather than just a home to live in. And I think that mindset shift that they experience when someone buys their first property being something that can also generate income, it changes the trajectory of their financial future. And so that was the reason why we wanted to talk about this today, because it's such a powerful tool, especially for our younger listeners.
Yeah, and that's actually how I got started. I mean, I had zero knowledge about real estate, like honestly, and I had zero aspirations to become a real estate investor. But when I had a small down payment for a house, it seemed obvious to me to buy a house that I didn't have to pay the whole mortgage on. Like to me, that was obvious. I've been frugal my whole life. I've learned from other people's mistakes. And so when I did it and I had my whole mortgage being paid off for me, I was like, why do other people not do this? I just could not wrap my mind around why people my age were going out and buying houses that they were going to have to pay off for 30 years. And I think by doing that, by buying a house that is at the top of your budget and is just for you and has no income potential, it's not a horrible decision because it's still going to benefit you in the long run, but it's going to take you a lot longer to pay that house off and cover that mortgage than if you had help covering the mortgage from a tenant. So, when I got started, it was like the obvious solution. I was like, I don't want to pay for my own mortgage. Like, I don't even want to pay for my rent. Like, I wanted to figure out a way to get my mortgage paid for me, and house hacking was the obvious solution. And so, to me, I'm surprised that more people don't do it. And it seems like it's becoming more popular and more people are getting into real estate. And that might be just because I'm in this world now, but it does seem more popular. Like more people are interested in wanting to know how to create financial freedom. But house hacking sometimes can be treacherous. Like sometimes you have to live next door to people, or you have to live in a grungy basement and in order to make that payment. Now, if you want to live in the upstairs in the nicer unit, it's going to be you're going to have a lot more of the mortgage to cover. So it's kind of just based off your preferences, but there is sacrifice. You're going to have to move. You're going to have to live with a neighbor. You're going to, like, maybe you're even house hacking out rooms. Like that's sacrifice. So,
Yeah.
but time is money. So the more like time you spend in situations like these, the more money you'll save up, and then you'll be able to eventually, like 5 house hacks down the line, be able to buy a true investment property. And then from there, your life is going to change.
Well,
David?
let me ask you, like, why is the concept so powerful? Why is this strategy so powerful in your opinion?
Well, I think the biggest cost for people who want to um the biggest cost for most people is their mortgage payment or their rent payment. So if you look at it, about 50% of your paycheck is usually going to your mortgage or your rent. And so if you can free up that capital, then there's a lot of possibilities, whether it's just being able to save more money, being able to reinvest that money, or just having more fun on vacations. So if you're able to somehow free up your living expense and live for free, then and you're still working, then you're going to have a lot more of a fruitful life. And so house hacking is an obvious solution to that. Is yes, you have this mortgage and it's your responsibility, but you have a renter paying 80% of it. Like to me, um, now you have 80% of that mortgage freed up to save for another house. Otherwise, most people don't save. I think it's like 75% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency. And so imagine if 75% of Americans were only paying 80% of their living costs, then they'd be fine, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's two real key components. The first is just the financial aspect, which you sort of alluded to, and that is there's two major benefits when you're buying a house hack property. The first is, like you mentioned, your expenses are lower because someone else is helping to supplement the cost of the mortgage. And number two, the down payment is going to be lower. If you're buying just a traditional rental property, you're generally going to have to put 20%, a minimum of 20% down on that property. Well, if you're buying a house hack property that you intend on living in one of the units, you can put down as little as 3% in some instances, typically 5%. And so the amount of money the amount of cash that you have to have available to actually own a rental property is a lot less. So that's the financial piece. The other piece I mentioned out the gate on this episode, but it's just a mental thing. It's a switch goes off in people's minds when they realize, my goodness, I can own this piece of real estate and someone else is paying it off for me. And once that switch is flipped, I think it's hard for people to go back and they just want to do more and more of it. So pretty
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. And it's like, I see a lot of young people come out of high school, get a job, and then they have all this, they have a lot of more money than they've ever had, right? Even though it's not a lot of money, they have a lot more money than they ever have. Then they go buy the nicest car and get a big loan payment. Then they go buy the nicest house they can afford and have a big house payment. Then all of a sudden they need to make more money, right? So they have to get a second job or work more hours or get a better job, and then they have more money coming in, but then they end up spending that. And so people are always like making a certain amount of money and spending a certain amount of money. And I think the biggest part of that mindset change is realizing that like the bigger that gap is, the better off you're going to be. If you have to drive a crappy car, or if you have to live in a house in a neighborhood maybe you don't love, but it seems like it's a good investment. Like there are sacrifices to be made. And I would say 99% of successful real estate investors have made lots of personal sacrifices. But the end goal is to free up your time so you have more time to spend with your family, retire early, leave your W-2 job. So these are the end goals. And so, yes, you have to sacrifice for a few years and you have to pinch pennies for a few years, but in the end, it's worth it. And I mean, house hacking is for almost anyone. Almost anyone could house hack. Like this isn't something that is hard to come by. I don't think I've talked with a client where this wasn't an option. Um, they might be a year out, they might have to save more money, but this is always an option.
Yeah. Yeah, love it. And I think if you're in that age group that we identified, like that's the easiest time for you to make the sacrifices that we're discussing. And so if you're under 25 years old, even under 30 years old, if you're just starting a family or if you're single, like you absolutely need to go down this path. It will definitely change your financial future.
That's it for today. For more daily investing tips and real estate secrets, don't forget to visit breakfreerealestate.com and make sure to like, subscribe, and share our podcast. We will see you tomorrow.